Alright, just dropping right in. You may notice the green screen's gone. I'm moving some stuff around the basement dojo, so back to the old school setup till we get everything done. But if you like the setup, let me know. But let's get into our top 10 most used Pokemon in base Fossil. So running from the data we have some runners up that I think are worth mentioning because they're big players in the meta. I think Rain Dance accounts for a good portion of the meta. However, a lot of its Pokemon don't appear in other decks. It's a very set deck. Other decks are not using Blastoise. Like Systal will not play Blastoise. Systal will not play Articuno. But they are extremely important to the meta, so they are Pokemon to know. Electabuzz also, I think, is very slept on. It kills Dodrio. Dodrio is a huge part of the meta. It does struggle with some Systal elements, but I think it does prey upon Dodrio decks very well. I think it also suffers from the fact that it has the same weakness as Wigglytuff, so I think that's why it's unplayed so far, but I think Electabuzz could have a bigger share of the market soon. I think Mime is also extremely important. Mime is usually only a 1 or 2 of in a deck. Usually it's kind of a teched in Pokemon to save you from Rain Dance or some Wigglytuff decks, but Mime definitely worth knowing, a very important Pokemon. So first up we have Mewtwo. Mewtwo is extremely important. It appears in a lot of our decks that we have in the top 10 decks that are played in the meta. That'd be like your DFP list, your Sisal decks, your Wigzoo list. There's also some in there as well. Systal is also a huge contributor to this count because Systal is the most played deck, so Mewtwo's in there, it's going to show up. But it's not played, as a 3 of or so in most decks. Usually it's like a 1 or a 2. That's why it's so low on this list. DFP does help carry that number because you do play 3 of them in that list, and I think DFP is on the rise because it's a very strong deck. So why is Mewtwo so good? One reason is because it has that attack that energizes itself, which is great. Recovers energy from the discard pile. That puts some unique pressure on the opponent. They're not safe if they're using energy removals. You will have an attacker eventually. It also kills Hitmonchan dead. That'll become important later, where we see where Hitmonchan sits. And Mewtwo also gatekeeps a lot of Pokemon that would have play in the meta, like Alakazam and Muck. Don't really see play because you gust and kill them with Mewtwo. Now, Mewtwo is really bad at killing colorless Mons like Wigglytuff, because they have that resistance, so that is something to keep in mind, that it does get walled, so it's not a great starting Pokemon, but you can rotate into it to take out key targets. It is solid versus a lot of things, but you also need to fear Mew. Mew is a Pokemon that's used exclusively to kill Mewtwo. I mean, it does some other things, like it can de-evolve Rain Dance, but typically Mew is a bomb to kill Mewtwo. It also has the interesting ability to stall out people and use Fuji to recover shuffle cards back into your deck once you've powered up your Mewtwo, so it does have that bonus mode as well. Going to our number 2, we have Ditto. Ditto's a very versatile Pokemon, that's why we see it in so many decks. It appears in a lot of Psy lists, Grass Doll lists, it also appears in Moltres now. I think that's kind of a new thing, is that Ditto is appearing in those Moltres lists. It also appears in some Tradmaker lists that some of the other Mons can't take care of. Ditto can copy them and help buy some time or take care of some nasty problems. It also helps you copy utility Mons that the opponent might have, like, for instance, if you're playing against Systal, you can use that to copy rival Mewtwo's. You can use that to copy rival Ducks if they're trying to Duck Lock you. It helps you with Wigglytuff because you have basically a basic Wigglytuff, and you get a couple DCEs and you're in, or you can power up your own Blastoise or something to that effect and do some decent damage if you're against Rain Dance. And like I said, it gives Trad a lot of pivot, a lot of potential, helps with a lot of those Mons. It's very good with Scoop Up. Like I said, it threatens Mewtwo very well. You can, remove their Mewtwo if they've got 1 or 2 energies. You then power up your own Ditto Mewtwo, and then you're threatening lethal on them, so something to keep in mind. A lot of people also don't consider that when Ditto is damaged, like when it's up to 50 damage or so, the opponent can gust out another Pokemon and your Ditto dies as it goes to the bench, so something to be aware of. And Ditto's also very vulnerable to a counter Mewtwo. It gets gusted out and then one-shot as well. Ditto also struggles against Lickitung. It can copy Lickitung for a while, but eventually Lickitung is going to hit heads, and when you get confused, your Ditto dies. So Ditto just kind of a great utility Mon in a lot of decks. That's why it appears so high. Up at 8, we have Chansey. Chansey's kind of the beat stick or cudgel in a lot of decks. A lot of stall decks want this as their big killer. It also helps buy a lot of time because it has 120 HP. You can just sit Chansey on the bench if you want with 1 or 2 energies, and then you're always threatening to do lethal damage because you could just go DCE and kill something, reach out and kill something. It also kills most of the things in the meta in one hit. There are some that it won't, like some of the big stage 2s. It also retreats very efficiently. I don't know why Chansey has a retreat of 1, probably because of the thematicness from the Safari Zone, but it makes it very strong. One thing to keep in mind is if you're playing against something that has psychic energy, if you double edge, Chan can reach out and kill you in 1 hit. So something to be in mind if you're especially against like DFW or something to that effect. Chansey also synergizes very well with some of the utility mons, like especially Ghastly, because Ghastly can get those DCs back, and then you can chain off doing double edges that way as well. So something to keep in mind. Chansey just a very strong Pokemon. At 7, we have Ghastly, which I think is a very underrated Pokemon, but very useful. It's a utility mon that appears in a lot of like Psystall lists. It also appears in what's called DCE.deck because it has some synergy with double colors energy attackers, like I said before. And also 9 Bomb. It's kind of a tech piece in a lot of like blasting style decks because you need to be able to kill Mime, because Mime stops those decks that are hitting for big damage right away. So Ghastly has a lot of utility. It free retreats, which most decks are going to need one of those anyway unless they're running Dodrio, so huge bonus there. Fighting resistance is huge considering how much Hitmonchan there is. More on that later. It hits Hitmonchan, it hits Mewtwo, it hits Mime for weakness, and if it paralyzes them, even better. It can probably 2-shot a Mime, and especially if it paralyzes it, it doesn't have a chance to escape. You've got some good stuff going on. It helps recur those energies, like I said. Helps power up Chanseys, helps Wigglytuffs in the DCE.deck. Could also buy you some time stalling too with its Lick Attack. One thing to keep in mind though is it has very low HP. If you use that attack to recover energy, you're at a high risk of a Scyther Slash and a plus power killing you. You're at risk of Mewtwo doing that as well. Something to keep in mind. Also, it doesn't attack well into Lickitung or Wigglytuff, which are pretty big Pokemon in the meta. So, I mean, usually Ghastly's not your big attacker anyway, but something to keep in mind. 6th place, we have Magmar. Magmar is a useful staller. It can also be an attacker in some decks as well. So it appears in Moltres lists, Wigmar lists, Tradmakers, and some Zoo lists. It has a very undercosted retreat. Retreating for 1 is very strong. Its attacks are also very great, both of them. In most decks that want it, you're running 4 of. Probably not Wigzoo because you don't have the room, but most decks are running 4 of these if they want access to Magmar. Attacks very well into Scyther. Scyther's pretty big in the meta, as you'll see later. Can also attack into Lickitung, which is important, as we'll see, because you can hit it with that poison and chip away and make sort of an inevitability engine. It's also very excellent in Moltres lists. It can be your like 5th through 8th Lickitung, and it's also got some reach on it, like I said, with the poison. What it does struggle against is those Drio lists, which are a big part of the meta because they can use the Dodrio to swap in and out, which clears the status. So you really want that status with the smokescreen and the poison going off. So maybe less relevant against Rio decks than it is some stall lists. Also, with Blastoise being a big part of the meta, Blastoise can reach out and kill this thing for 3 energy, so something to keep in mind because they can just evolve, which clears smokescreen, and you're dead. But typically, a lot of lists that run Magmar don't have much problem with Blastoise. Kind of counterintuitive. Watch my other videos if you want more information on that. At 5th place is Wigglytuff. It would probably appear much higher on this list, but it only appears as a 3 of in most lists instead of a 4 of, so it would probably be higher if that were the case. We're going to see this in a variety of decks, Wigmar, DFW, Zoo lists, which are a large portion of the meta. It's got the most busted attack in the game, which makes sense why it's in every, well, not every list, but a lot of lists. So doing 60 for 2 energies is just busted, because you're using 1 regular and 1 DC, typically, ideally. It also has an attack that can help you stall out. It can sing and put people to sleep, so not horrible either. Jigglypuff itself is really good at killing Mime. Mime can be used to stall out Wigglytuff with its shield ability. But Jigglypuff hits for 20, and it also resists Psychic, so excellent at doing that. It kills almost everything in the meta with, a regular attack and a plus power. There are some with higher HPs, but a lot of the meta Pokemon are about at 70 HP. Wigglytuff itself has 80, which is pretty good. However, it does get two-shot by Hitmonchan, so it can jab twice and you're dead. So something that's very relevant if you're fighting a fighting deck. A lot of Wigglytuff decks rely on Dodrio being set up, so I've seen some people struggle when they don't have those birds set up because you can't get Wigglytuff out of the active. So you may need a little more setup than a lot of decks because it is a Stage 1 Pokemon and Dodrio is a Stage 1 Pokemon. So it does require a little bit of setup to get your bonuses. In fourth place is Hitmonchan, which makes a lot of sense. Hitmonchan's in many, many lists. Doing 20 damage for 1 energy is the most busted attack in the game, especially on a Pokemon that has 70 HP. It's also hitting a lot of meta-relevant Pokemon for 40 damage for 1 energy. That'd be your like Wigglytuffs, Jigglypuffs, your Chanseys, your Lickitungs, things of that nature. Its second attack doesn't get used often, but if you're in a place where you have bonus energy, you can build that kind of pressure by powering up that attack to where they have to respect it with an energy removal, and then you attach a fighting and you're back into doing 40 against those meta Pokemon. The problem with Hitmonchan, though, is it has a retreat of 2, which is pretty hefty, and a lot of meta-relevant Pokemon punish you starting Hitmonchan. Like, if you get stranded with Hitmonchan in the active, it's bad. Ghastly blocks it, Bird's wall it, Scyther walls it, Articuno walls it. So, not something you necessarily want to start with in the active, but a very valuable Pokemon. Its weakness is Psychic, also pretty meta-relevant, as you can get killed by Mewtwo's, as I've said before, and Ghastly can kind of ping it down as well. In third place is Dodrio. It appears in a lot of decks as a 3 of. If it were 4 of, it'd be much higher, like I said. It appears in a lot of meta-relevant decks and unmeta-relevant decks because it's just that good. Its power is that strong. Lowering retreat by 1 is that good. Usually it's just seen as a kind of utility mon, but Rage is a solid attack. It can kill things dead, so you can't just chip a Doduo and then forget about it because it could be back later to do big damage. The fighting resistance is extremely strong, with Hitmonchan being the 4th most used Pokemon. And like I said, it's just incredible. Like, its power in the meta is so good. It does die to Electabuzz pretty easily. If it's got Thunder Punch online and a plus power, you are at risk, but Electabuzz doesn't see as much play as a lot of the other Pokemon, but something to keep in mind. And like I said before, it does take some setup to get Dodrio decks running because you're typically running a couple of Stage 1s instead of just basics, but very strong Pokemon. Alright, number 2 is Scyther. Like I said before, Scyther's kind of a 3 of. That's why it's probably, well, I guess it could be slightly higher, but usually it's a 3 of and appears in lists galore. I won't read off that list. But typically decks are either running Dodrio or Scyther, and those stall lists are usually going with Scyther because it takes up less space, and it helps with some other options as well. It's got a free retreat, which is insane, and then the fighting resistance, like I said, is very good. So packaged on 1 Pokemon, already strong. Its colorless attack makes it extremely splashable, so you can be attacking for 3 for 30, which doesn't sound great, but it is very good. A lot of decks do splash the 1 grass energy so that you can swing in with Swords Dance, which is something that has to be respected. If you turn 1 Swords Dance, you are threatening doing 70 damage, which a lot of the Pokemon in the meta are at on turn 2, and you can steal games that way. It does also not really hit any Pokemon that are meta relevant for weakness. The big one would be our Aerodactyl if it saw more play, but that's not the case. It's also afraid of Magmar. I mean, you can retreat out, and if you have 2 Scythers, you can do what's called Scyther Dancing, where you just kind of bounce them back and forth, because that clears status a lot like the Dodrio decks do as well. And with Magmar being a big part of the format, something to keep in mind. And at number 1, who else was it going to be? It's going to be Lickitung. Lickitung appears in the most played decks, and it's a 4 of. It's in every stall list, and then it appears in some others as kind of a tech piece or a 1 of. The tongue wrap on a 90 HP Pokemon's insane at buying time and stalling out the game. Its retreat, though, is a liability. That's why a lot of the stall lists run scoop ups instead of Dodrios, because you're never going to get that 3 all the way down. The Confusion Tack is also something not to sleep on. It can be very good at like stalling out Rain Dance lists and other lists that don't pivot very well, and use big Pokemon that have high retreats of their own. Very punishing. The psychic resistance is also relevant, as we've seen some of the Pokemon on this list are psychic, so something to keep in mind. But once again, you do have to respect that weakness to Hitmonchan. A lot of the meta-relevant Pokemon are trying to deal with Lickitung, so Lickitung does have a target on its back, but there's not really many that see much play that automatically kill Lickitung. I mean, some people have played Leeless. Lee with Electro does threaten to kill Lickitung in one hit, but I don't know how good at the rest of the field it is. Something to keep in mind. So Lickitungs are big bad at number 1. So looking at the data here, I've got about, I think, 1,400 games categorized. Sisal, of course, is the most played list, kind of contributing to those numbers. And then you kind of see how it drops off and you see your Wiggly list. So I just wanted to show kind of where those numbers came from. Anyone that's curious, this is kind of what it looks like now. And then there's a lot of kind of rogue lists that don't appear on this chart, but this is why the data kind of skewed this way. And finally, if you are interested in getting involved in some Pokemon, I've got a link to the Pokemon 1999 website. You can click on it there. I've got a link down below. And also the Discord, I'll put a link down below as well. Not sure what I want to do next. If you guys have any ideas, comment. If you hate my setup, let me know. I don't know. I'll put the green screen back. But until then,